I am going to do a little reading wrap-up. I'm going to do the months of November that I've read so far. It is not the end of November yet. I think it's about November 20th, I believe. But my kids are out of the house, so I'm doing it now. So first I finished Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine. I actually listened to this on audiobook. I had picked this one up at a book sale, but I got it on audio, so that's how I listened to it this time. And at first, I wasn't a huge fan of the book. In the beginning, the characters are very unlikable. I didn't know that I was going to like anyone in it, and I didn't know that I wanted to listen to a long story about people that I didn't like. But it turns out that you come to know them more, you realize why they're the way they are, and it is a good story of growth. There are some long-seated traumas with Eleanor, and she works through them, and it's just a nice little story. You come to love her, and she turns into a much more pleasant person by the end. So Eleanor Oliphant I recommend it. It's a good story of people who like self-help books, but like to bridge into fiction every now and then, because she goes through her own self-healing journey, I feel. I believe I gave that one a 4-star, I think. Next, I finished The Missing of Claire de Loon. This one is a second book in the series. It is a translated work from France, I believe. Christelle Davos is the author, and the first book is, I don't even remember what the first book is called, but it's the Mirror Visitor series. And in the first book, it's set up where the Earth has been fractured into these arcs. They're pretty much just, if you imagine the sphere of rock, and then it breaks into different clusters, so the top is bigger and then it gets smaller at the bottom. And so each of these arcs is ruled over by an ancestor, they call them, but they're pretty much like a god. They live forever, and then they have imbued certain powers that they have into each of the different families of the people on this arc. And so each family gets their own powers that are descended from the ancestor. And so the main character, Ophelia, she comes from an arc that deals with animism, animating inanimate objects. And so she is good at, she's called the reader, and so she can feel an inanimate object, and see who the previous owner was and what they were doing and feeling at the time. And then she also has another power that's much more rare that's called, that's mirror visiting, and that she can go through mirrors and travel to other mirrors. And that's a power that is rare even amongst her people. And she is set up with a marriage with someone from a different arc in the beginning of the first book. And that new arc, it is nothing like hers. It is a arc of illusions, and so everything is not as it seems, and she doesn't get along very well with them. The family is very standoffish, and so she just has to try and live in this new place where she knows no one, and nobody is like her, and she doesn't really get along with her fiance very well. So the first book is about her adapting and trying to fit in this new climate, and then the second book, it kind of expands the world a little bit more. Goes more into depth into their relationship and the other political aspects that are going on in the arcs. The animism arc was a little bit political, and you learn more about all the politics in the second book more. But the new arc that she goes to is very political. All the families are always vying for more attention from the ancestor, and so it's a new climate that she has to get used to. I liked the second book even more than the first. I think I gave it a 4.5 stars, somewhere in there. The first book, I liked it. It was a little bit slow to get going, but I'm hoping that the third book will be really good. And I believe the fourth book has now been translated as well. I haven't seen it in paperback yet, so we'll see if I end up buying it in hardcover or not. I have the first book in hardcover and the second and third in paperback, so we'll see what I get around to. The next book I did was by Chloe Gong, Foul Lady Fortune. So this I actually got in a book of the month in October, looks like. But this is kind of like a side series from her first duology that she wrote. The first duology was a Romeo and Juliet retelling, except for it takes place in Shanghai in the 1920s, I believe. It has a magical realism type aspect where there's monsters that are coming, and they force you to tear out your throat. So it's very violent, but this one is after the second series, following a side character that you meet in the first, the cousin of the main character. So it's interesting, it's good. I liked this one. I think I liked it more than the first series, actually. But I think I gave it a 4-star. I can't tell you too much about it because I don't want to spoil anything, but it has to do more with the Japanese that are coming in to take over Shanghai. She has been turned into a spy, and she can't be killed, so she's now immortal after things happened. So next, I listened to A Gentleman in Moscow. I read a little bit of it too, but I mostly listened to it. It is about a Russian count who, after Russian oligarchy, or the Russian rulers were taken down, this count was put into, I don't think it's based off a true story, I think it's just made up based off of counts. But he was put under house arrest in a hotel, so it's just following his life in the hotel. Nothing happens, it's not that exciting. I did like it, it's very well written. I gave it 3 stars though, just because it was a little bit boring, but it is very interesting, and I liked the count, and it's interesting. So next I did Killers of a Certain Age by Deanna Raybourn. This was a September book of the month. I'm trying to get through more book of the months because I want to rate all 12. I like to get the badges, so I want to rate 12 by the end of the year, and I'm behind. So this was about 4 60-year-old women who were assassins together, and then they recently retired, and they were sent on a cruise, and then it turns out that their company is trying to kill them off, so they go against them and are fighting a bunch of people 40 years younger than them. So it's kind of an amusing take. Women of a certain age, killers of a certain age. You don't see very many 60-year-old women. So next I read Snake Has Fallen to Earth. It was a on Libby. It was the big read where everybody could get it with no wait this month. It wasn't my favorite. It was very different. It was 2 storylines of 2 people, a cottonmouth snake that can turn into a person type thing, and then a girl on Earth, and how the worlds collide, how these animal people can come to Earth and interact with our people. It very much had to do with climate change and endangered species, and what happens in our real world can impact their world. It was good. It wasn't great. Not too much to say about it. And then after that, I read From Scratch for my book club this month. We didn't know what we were going to when we signed up for it, but it turned out to be very good. The first half, I bawled. It's so sad. We pretty much just picked it because Netflix, everybody was talking about it, so I'm like, sure, I'll read it. And then I found out what it was about, and I'm like, oh my gosh. But if you don't know, it's a memoir written by Tembi Locke. I have the book, but I borrowed it to my friend because she has to finish it now. But her husband got cancer and died. That happens right in the beginning. That's the first half of the book. That's why you cry all the time. But then it is her growth journey, how she lives in that, feels the pain of the loss. She also has a 7-year-old daughter when her husband dies. So it tells the story of when and how they met, how they got together, how they had their daughter, and then the life they had, and then it goes past that. The start of the book is when he dies, and then she tells you little snippets of her previous life getting to that point, and then it shares the growth. Her husband was from Italy, Sicily, and so it's very small country, living with the villagers who haven't really seen a Black woman. Tembi is a Black American woman, and so how she feels in a small town in Italy and how she comes to navigate that landscape, as well as just overcoming her husband's death and hopefully moving on and going forth with her life from there. So I liked it a lot. I think I gave it a 4-star. It was very good. Once you get past the crying part, I think it was like 120, 150 pages or so, or not even 150 probably, maybe. And then the second half is mostly just growth. There's a couple little teary-eye moments after that, but that's mostly just from bonding and good experiences, so I'd recommend it. And then finally, I just finished The Book Eaters by Sunyi Dean. I wasn't a huge fan of this one. I went back and forth between giving it a 2 or 3 on Goodreads, because it was kind of like a 2.5 book for me. I liked the premise of it. My friend wanted to read it, and it sounded interesting, so I read it as well. It is about these people who eat books. It's kind of like vampires, but they eat books, so they have book teeth. But some of their species are, I think, mind eaters, I think they call them, or brain eaters. And so instead of eating books, they're mutated, and they have a tongue that like goes into your ear and sucks out your brain. And so in this book, the women can only reproduce 2 times and they're dying out. And so they are treated as princesses, but they have no freedom, essentially. And so this woman doesn't do well with that. She realizes later in life that she likes women. She's a lesbian. But that's not allowed because you have to reproduce 2 times to try and continue the race. And so she runs away from the families. They're called the system that they have in place where it's a patriarchy, where they keep everyone in check and arranged marriages and all that. So she runs away with her son that she has, who is a mind eater. She's trying to keep him getting killed. They have developed a drug where it stops them from needing the nourishment of minds, so they can eat books. They still want to eat minds, but they no longer need to survive. They can now eat books if they take this drug. And so she's just trying to navigate running away from the families and trying to help out her son. So that's pretty much the gist of the book. I liked the premise. It was just too weird for me, and the relationships I didn't like how they were written. The relationship between her and her son, and her and a different woman that she meets, and some friends along the way, they just weren't for me. Doesn't mean it's a bad book. I know some people loved it, but not my book. So yeah, that's about it. I'll probably have another book or 2 before the end of November, but I'll just include those with the December wrap-up, or time wrap-up, or whatever I decide to do. So yeah, thanks for joining me. I'll see you next time.